I could be wrong, but I think I have finally found the perfect analogy for coding agents, and that is the sewing machine. And here's why I think it is the sewing machine. Because before the sewing machine, seamstresses had to stitch every single stitch by hand. And then when the sewing machine came out, you can bet there were people out there who said, no, 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 no. Real sewing is done one stitch at a time. We don't bring machines in here, okay? We don't have the machines do the sewing for us. We are still doing that. Of course, that did not stick, and now any professional seamstress is going to use a sewing machine. And in fact, the sewing machine has made it so easy to sew that if you told me, who has almost no experience with sewing machines, to make a shirt, you can bet I can probably make something that resembles a t-shirt, and it can probably work almost as well as a t-shirt, at least on the first wear. However, I don't know how to do things like make this. I don't know how to make sure that the sleeves are the same size. I don't know what types of seams I'm supposed to do, and I don't actually know the design of a t-shirt. I would just be cutting out pieces of fabric that look like a t-shirt and putting them together. And then, probably within the first wash, this t-shirt is going to start falling apart. And the difference between me and a professional seamstress is that a professional seamstress is able to create a t-shirt on a sewing machine that is actually going to last and that truly looks like a t-shirt. And then when you ask the seamstress, now I need a dress, they are going to know how to make a dress. Guess what? I have no idea how to make a dress. That is where it all of a sudden becomes much more complicated. Or a suit or a raincoat. Those things take a lot more knowledge than a t-shirt. And going back to our coding agents, if you're to ask somebody, such as a business analyst, to make an application, you can bet that with a coding agent, they can spin up a simple HTML application and it might even be connected to a database. But just like me making a t-shirt on a sewing machine, their application is going to work on the demo, but as soon as you put that into a production environment, it's no longer going to work. It's going to fall apart very quickly. And then as soon as you ask this person to make anything more complicated than the software equivalent of a t-shirt, it's not going to work. It might look like it from the onset, maybe, but then as soon as you start trying to use it, it's literally not going to work. And that's just like if I was to try to make a raincoat. I might be able to start, but I have a feeling I wouldn't even figure out how to get the buttons to match up so you could button up your raincoat. And so what I think creates the similarities behind here is that just like the sewing machine, it still needs a skilled seamstress in order to create the clothing that we then wear and that actually functions as the clothing is supposed to function. And in the coding world, in the software development world, even with an LLM, you still need somebody who has mastered the craft of creating software, of creating good software, in order to create it even with an LLM. And so I think it's still very important and very vital skill set to have is making software, just like seamstresses are still a very vital skill set for making clothes, despite the fact that we now have sewing machines. And so there may be some people out there saying, but I don't know how to code. I only know how to vibe code, and I have made great products. And to that, I say, that was still a skill, and you still spend hours and hours crafting your skill set in order to vibe code something. Now, I might not believe you that it works, but maybe your software is just as good as any software that is traditionally crafted. And so like the seamstress that no longer is going to stitch each seam by hand, the average software developer is no longer going to write every single line of code by hand, but you can bet that they're going to use their expertise with the LLM to craft great software. And that is why I believe LLMs and sewing machines are one and the same.